Okay. Okay, shalom everyone. We are Baruch Hashem, Haidul Hashem Kitov on our next Shabbos Chabura. Today is the 11th of Elul, the last day in August. We have a little under 3 weeks to go to Rosh Hashanah. Baruch Hashem, we started the next Melacha, Ma'amer, gathering, as we gather together after a very beautiful summer, and Mirz Hashem are moving forward to a closing up year and striving for a much bigger new year. So we defined Ma'amer, gathering, as not just a physical activity, right, but as actually creating a usable unit through all the various individual parts that grew from their own separate place. What's the koyach of gathering? So we talked about it physically, like a bunch of figs together, a strand of pearls, a bouquet of flowers. And we basically said, we're now looking at something in its totality, the reality of a collective unit that has a higher function than it would on its own. So we then said, how would that apply to various other things? So of course, what we're looking at is the four elements of fire, wind, water, and earth. And we said each pairing, a dyad, or a triad, a 3-unit, or a 4-unit, a quad, all can be used elementally, right, to create something higher, a higher unit. But why would we do that? Why would that be important? So we introduced 2 levels, and we really threw in the third at the end. So I'm going to actually say it in its correct order. There are going to be 3 levels to how the elements can interact. The most fundamental level, believe it or not, and the Nisiv Shalom brings us down in various places in the concept of Shalom and the 4 elements. He says, how is it even shayach to create the elements working together? Their natural nature is to be oppositional, which he calls hisnagdus. The word neged means to be one opposite another, right? Fire evaporates water, water extinguishes fire, and wind can blow up fire, etc. So he says the very nature of elements starts at the level of hisnagdus, as opposition. Well, what we have to do is look at the elements as not just being natural in nature, but actually being divine. And they actually represent a spiritual koyach in the soul at an elemental level, even beyond our koychas and nefesh, our actual capacities, or even beyond our midos, our actual spiritual traits or attributes. At an elemental level, these koychas and nefesh are literally surging through our soul into our nefesh, and then has a splitting mechanism. If we use them to the side of our ego, then they take on physicalized properties. If we use them to the spiritual side of our ego, then the nefesh elokis, then they take on higher divine qualities. And what we're trying to do is to harness these elements individually, and now we've introduced through Ma'amer collectively, through the dyad, triads, and quad level, how to use them. So on the one hand, they're not going to be oppositional, hisnagdus. 2, they can work together in tandem, hiskashrus, how they connect and relate together, how they partner up. And on the highest level, hiskalulus, how they can inter-include in one another to such a level of partnership, they become like a unified unit. They become like a team to such a level that there's really no distinction of the parts anymore. There's actually just working together as a unit. Like a bouquet of flowers, you're not looking at the 4 different kinds of flowers and even the arrangement. You're just calling it a unit, a bouquet, or a strand of pearls, or again, like we said, even a symphony. So this level, 3 levels of consciousness, hisnagdus, hiskashrus, and hiskalulus, we're going to use in very on-the-ground relatable terms. We're going to call them the 3 C's, okay? 3 C's. First C is contradictory. That's hisnagdus. That's how the elements at the very basic elemental level, or even naturally, are opposing one another. If we choose to bring them together and rectify them at some level, they become complementary, the second C. And that complementary nature means not only are they not fighting against one another, they're actually working in tandem. That's the partnership level of his kashrus. And then the final level, the completing part. they complete and are completed through the other. That's the hiskalalus part. So we're going to work on how to use the dyads, the triads, and maybe a little bit of the quad level to see how they can evolve from the contradictory level, opposing one another, the complementary level, working together in tandem, and the completing level, how they can blend and harmonize to such a level that a whole new reality is born from them joining together and unifying, that they take on a whole new, that's the highest level of what Ma'amr can bring together, creating a usable unit of how they grew separately. So you're going, wouldn't that be amazing? Now, what would that produce? Produce certainly a tremendous amount of inner happiness and contentment, inner fulfillment, inner satiation, and ultimately a tremendous sense of joy, knowing who I really am. I'm actualizing the various parts of myself in their more integrated way, and I'm fulfilling my own personal mission in the greatest way that I can, based on everything that I am and everything that I'm not. That would be the ultimate of what we're striving towards personally and what Ma'amr can bring a person to. Okay, so with that, let's bring it to the two elements we're going to work on. And we're going to take it through the process of the contradictory level, complementary level, and work towards the completing level, practically, how it's going to work. Okay, so we're going to look at today, God willing, at the dyadic level of fire and earth. And if you just remember, fire corresponds to the level of Yud, the beginning of the process, and the Hay is the final end, the final Hay is the level of earth. So we're going to look at a contradictory level. We're going to talk about it conceptually, practically, and practically today. And we're going to keep working it out until we see how it works. So fire and earth. So clearly, fire is something that is a very powerful process that gives light and heat. And spiritual, we've said many times, it's called Soiser Almanas Livnois, to destroy for the sake of building something new. So what is the power of fire? It's the power of recreation of something new based on a willingness and a readiness to let go of the old. Whether the old is outdated, it had its place, but you don't need it anymore. The old wants to be developed and redefined anew, and you need to keep some parts of the old and bring it forward, or whether the old is really harmful and you want to completely abolish it. But the power of fire has that ability to let go of the old and recreate the new. And that's where our passion comes from. That's where our innermost motivation comes from, and our innermost strivings. Okay, so that's fire. Earth, very much the opposite. Earth is creating a psychological state and a spiritual state of structure, of stability, of a sense of permanence to something, where something comes into its existence in a fully developed form. It feels settled, it feels established, it has a very stable quality, and in that stability has a lot of permanence and order and structure and consistency, etc. That's very much what earth brings. So clearly, if you hear that at the first glance, physically and spiritually and psychologically, they're very much opposing. One is completely destroying to recreate, and the other one is saying, I want to look at creation in its full expression in and of itself. It's fully developed, and let's enjoy it for what it is. Clearly, those are very opposing. So we're going to acknowledge right off the bat the hisnagdus element, the contradictory part, and seemingly, if we have those tendencies in ourselves, we say, I have this internal force that's pulling at. Part of me likes to strive, part of me likes to move forward, part of me really likes to see things in a new way with a fresh look. And at the same time, part of me likes to feel settled and to feel a sense of predictability and consistency and order and structure where things just are the way they are. So how would we begin to reconcile them upwards in a way that they could actually work together? So I'm going to offer two different ways to look at it practically, and we'll see they're both true, and you really need all of them. Eventually, over time, we're going to add more over time. The first one's going to be growing through the holidays, looking at Rosh Hashanah all the way through the year. Rosh Hashanah itself is a time when we take everything that we had last year, so from the year 5780 to 5781, we say last year was hopefully good, and good, you should have a good gebenched year for something even greater. We may say last year was great, and we want to move it forward to a higher level where we want to hold on to some things of old and let go of others. Other times we may say we had a great year, but what was shaykh last year is no longer shaykh this coming year. May also say it wasn't the greatest year. In fact, I kind of like to burn out some of the things and break them out in a way that they're not part of my life, and that the new year can be a new year of new beginnings without the remnants of the old. So Seisra Amanas Livnois, destroying for the sake of building, as it relates to Rosh Hashanah, as it relates to the beginning of a new year, a new creation, a new higher divine self, may have any one or all these elements. And Rosh Hashanah is daring us, saying, please be brave and humble to start anew. It's also a new month, right? It's the month of Tishrei. So it's also Rosh Chodesh, the first of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah. It's a willingness to recreate ourselves again spiritually. And again, deciding whether we're going to knock out the old completely, say it was good, but we don't need it anymore, or we're going to break down the old, but bring forward some elements that are relevant to a new year. The koyach of Rosh Hashanah comes with fire. And you could see that. The very process of destroying for the sake of recreating is like the world being recreated. And in Kabbalah, it actually says it very explicitly, that from the 25th of Elul through the 1st of Tishrei is the first 6 days of creation. So, of course, Rosh Hashanah is the 6th day, creating of Adam and Chava. And that's the recreation of the world anew, which means since we're a microcosm of the world itself, we're recreating ourselves anew. So that clearly is the power of Aish in general and the Aish within ourselves, to have the vision, to see ourselves in a whole new kind of light, to have a higher passion for striving in a way that we never have before. Okay, great. So now you run that out, 12 months in a normal year and 13 months in a Shana Milberis, an impregnated year, a leap year. So we're now a little less than 3 weeks to go to Rosh Hashanah. And you have the month of Elul. And now everything is coming to fruition. Everything is now becoming fully expressed, certainly through the summer months. The fruits, the harvest are all being ingathered spiritually. Whatever you sowed, the pure seeds of what the new potential you could be at Rosh Hashanah time is now, hopefully, God willing, going to be in its more actualized form. It's more fully developed form that has form and structure. It has an actual existence to it, God willing. It has a development that has form, practice, consistency. It has a structure that now is stable, is now manifest, and has a solid presence in your life. That's what Elul is all about. And therefore, if we think about the month of Rosh Hashanah, the first month, and the very last month of the year, Elul, there's your elements of Aish and Afar, fire and earth. And they seem very contradictory. There's the Hisnagdus. And yet we're trying to see them as complementary, and Halavai aspire to be completing. But one thing we see for sure is potential. Here's how we're going to resolve it. Potential is great. That's what we set into reality in pure abstract reality in the beginning of the year. And then comes Elul. We have the pure, tangible, concrete manifestation of those seedlings that we sowed at the beginning of the year, the recreation of ourselves in pure potential and the full manifestation of ourselves in divine actuality. So we see it's not a contradiction. It's really a process, that everything comes from pure potential to partial actualization over the year. We spoke about this by Tu B'Shvat being 1/3 of the trimester, right? 1/3 of the year, first trimester in time. And then the full trimester, all three, fully developed at the end of Elul, very last day of Elul. So we see we're coming through a process of partial actuality into full actuality. And when we get to the earth level, we come to see it was very much the manifestation, the full expression of our Rosh Hashanah itself, which means Elul really begs us to go back to our Rosh Hashanah and the simple inner will of what we wanted, what we aspired for, what we yearned and longed for, and how that developed on a trimester level over the year. And finally, when it comes to its full form, we want to see what became of us. Did we grow into the higher spiritual beings that we aspire to be, whatever your goals were, whatever the particular things you're working towards. But as a changed whole person, there's the ma'amer, as a changed whole person, how have I really fundamentally in any way become a different person, an upgraded person, a more refined spiritual person? And now it's time to earthify it, to put tangible expression to that, to get it as clear and as detailed as possible, and see that it was the development of a whole year. In that way, fire and earth, Rosh Hashanah and Elul, are very much complementary as part of a divine process of creating and recreating oneself. On a completing level, right, the Hiskalelus level, how could they go even higher? And really the truth would be is in the seed is the potential for everything that something is going to be, nothing more and nothing less. Everything it will be. And in the actualized form, let's say it's a fruit. The fruit is the fullest expression of fruition of everything that seed will be in its actual form. But really, they're one and the same thing. Why? Because pure potential and full actuality are just two sides of the same. One's purely in its encoded form, one is in a fully manifest form, but they're identical. And at that place, they're completing. They're not just a process of evolving and changing and growing into, but in its essential form, they're really one of the same thing. One is the architectural level of its pure design. One is the fully manifest level of its the built house. So at the completing level, we would look at fire and earth, Rosh Hashanah and Elul, as not just contradictory in nature, and not even just the year evolving, but really the pure innermost ratzon that we sowed during these seeds of the Chagim at Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur, Yimei Hadin, being judged al pi yira from a place of divine fear, and then Sukkos in the place of divine love, and then Simchas Torah in a place of divine closeness and intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and of course ourselves and others. At that place, we come to realize it's not just a year of change. It's a year of fully developing our innermost being and being brought out in the world. And when we feel that sense of wholeness and completion, that's the completing part. So this is a great example of how fire and earth on a dyadic level can look contradictory, like Rosh Hashanah and Elul, or Tishrei and Elul. But we've seen how they can become complementary and work towards completing. Of course, this could be a very extended shir on how to do a cheshbon and others, but on the very simplest level, really practical on the ground, it means you have to revisit your Rosh Hashanah. Whether you're going to go back to the pure innermost ratzon of what you wanted, what was it? Did you write it down? Okay. Did you track it? Did you monitor it? Did you see its progress? Or are you going to look at it in a more general, broad-based way? What were the highlights of the year? How did it concretely over the year come to express what it is you yearn for and long for in being Mamlech Hashem? Very important. If you have an actual cheshbon, kol hakavod. If you're going to do it more in general, broad strokes, great. If you're going to do it through intuitive scanning, fantastic. However, you're going to come to terms with this full year. I won't say this past year, because really now, as I remember when my Rebbeim said at first, and again, of course, like anything, it takes many years for divine wisdom to germinate. But when asked, Rebbe, how was the Rosh Hashanah davening? And you remember the first time he looked at him, he was like, what kind of question is that? I said, Rebbe, how was your davening? And he went like this, and he's like, Yaakov Zalman. I said, Rebbe, I just asked how your davening was. And he looked at me, basically, I have no idea. And I'm like, no idea? You don't know? Did you focus? Did you have good concentration? Did you have good pirush hamilim? Did you understand the words? He's like, I have no clue. I put in what I did. We'll see how the year plays out, and we'll see what Hashem was geyser Mekayim, what he decreed, and what he will fulfill over the year. So I said, so what's your answer again? He goes, basically, ask me an Elul, and I'll let you know how my year is. So of course, I planted a seed in my head. Towards the end of Elul, I said, Rebbe, I have a question for you. And he looked at me and goes, yeah, what do you want? So how was your Rosh Hashanah? He's like, what kind of, I said, Rebbe, you remember you told me? He goes, yeah, actually I did. Okay, so now I'm asking you, how was your Rosh Hashanah? And he looked at me and was like, oh, Taka, now you can ask. So then he went over his ear and he shared and he actually connected it back and he goes, oh, thank you for remembering. And now that's not just hashkafically the right thing to do, you really did it. So now you should do the same for yourself. And it made a tremendous impression, which is why I'm sharing it now. So to Bayas. So if I ask you now, how is your Rosh Hashanah? And you're going to go, Tafshin Pei, how is my Rosh Hashanah? Where did I daven again? Let me think. Are you asking me like my Shachris or my Musaf or the Mincha or how first day, second days, how you made Tshuva? Well, now I want to know what was Geyser Mekayim, what was decreed and fulfilled. And then how much did I bring into actualization, into form, physical structure, fully revealed in this world? And you're going, wow, that was my Rosh Hashanah. When we do that, we see the complementary nature of fire and earth. And if we can try and really work hard to graft them together as like pure potential and full actualization, you realize they're one of the same thing. And that's the completion process that we experience. So that's one example. Okay, let me think of another one that I had in mind. I'm just coming back to my mental head. I don't even have notes, so let me just think here what I was going to add. Right. Another example, and again, truth is there are endless examples, literally and clearly, and I think you would go, wow, it would work anyway that way, and the answer is yes. Anytime you have a way of perceiving the world, anything, we call that a hashkafa, a philosophical and even psychological way of perceiving the world, right? That means the way you naturally see the potential of how things are going to orient is going to come through your hashkafa. And ideally, we have to try and upgrade. We have to try and refine our hashkafa. And we can't just be settled with the way we saw the world last week, last year, last decade, or in the earlier parts. No different than, l'mashal, your clothing, right? Certainly a child, you see how a child grows from a neonate, a newborn first year. It's unreal, the amount of hyper rapid growth. And certainly a toddler to a younger person, adolescent, there's constantly, never mind the fashions, we'll forget that for a moment, but the natural process of growing. And then as you grow older and more mature, the sizes and shapes are going to change throughout, which means as we're always changing, upgrading the size, tailoring the fashion, etc. of our clothing, we have to do the same thing for our hashkafa. And that means very basic and fundamental. We have to be willing to break down and recreate our own inner vision of how we see the world, our own inner perspective of how we perceive the outer world. And that means when a new piece of wisdom comes your way, a new orientation to something, a new theoretical basis for something, a new way of seeing something, we want to upgrade. We want to upgrade. We want to lift our sights higher than what we saw previously. We could call that a new frame of reference, like glasses, new corrective visions, like the lenses itself. But that's what we really want to be doing. How often? As much as you learn, as much as you want to upgrade, as much as your attentional capacity will hold for. And therefore, that also means, and I'm not talking about Rosh Hashanah per se, it can really be any time. You take a shiur or a class, you hear something, you reflect on something that has an emotional or intellectual impression on you, you go, wow, that's just really a different way, a unique way, a special way, a rare way of looking. I like that. I want to try that on. But my old ways preclude that or make it difficult. So now I'm going to have to go through a process of soiser amanas livnois. I have to be willing to break down the old in order to recreate the new. Sometimes, again, it may mean from the old that stuff is krum. It's not correct. It's really false or quite misperceived. So that I'm going to want to break down, destroy, and completely excrete out of my system. Other times, it'll be, well, the way I saw before, it worked up to a point, but it's no longer necessary or relevant. So I'm going to break that down too and let it go. It served me well for then, but no longer now. And clearly HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving me this new perspective now, which is part of my new, more mature way of relating. The third level may be Seisra Amanas Livnois. I want to break down the old, but I want to carry certain parts that are still good and healthy and necessary, but I want to add, I want to make it a good addition, and therefore I'm going to take these new ideas, these new perspectives, these new anglings of how I now want to relate, and coupling it with the old, and therefore that's Seisra Amanas Livnois, and therefore that new perspective is going to be the frame of reference for how I look and see everything. That will be the higher context for how I relate to life. Okay, that's fire on Hashkafa level. On the earth level, Hashkafa isn't just perspective. Hashkafa drives your core values. Hashkafa drives your core decision-making process. And Hashkafa just drives all the effort you're going to put in from what's irrelevant to what's unimportant, to what's less important, moderately important, majorly important, ultimately important. All of that decision-making and effort-based is tied to your hashkafa. And we know we don't have endless resources in energy, in decision-making, or in perspective. We could only hold so much. So therefore, it's very necessary, like an animal sheds its skin many times over its lifetime, and as we go through the clothes, it's very, very important to update and upgrade our hashkafa, and then convert it into a halachic, practical, physical orientation to how we lead our daily life. And as we put in our effort and we make the right choices and we aspire to the right things, we live practically with a higher divine orientation. And when those two come together, the hashkafa joins with the halacha, then that's the fire joining with the earth. And when those two join together, they are no longer contradictory in nature. They're actually complementary. And therefore, when they complement together, what you see is your inner orientation drives your practical way of living, and then infuse it with wonderful meaning and great purpose and ultimate striving that makes a person happy and joyful, that makes a person feel purposeful in their life and fulfilled and aspiring. And even though things are good, we say good is good and better is better, because there's always greater things to aspire to. And then even the way I live practically, in a halachic level, aspire for more mitzvahs, to do them in a more correct way, in a more accurate way, with more understanding, more emotionality, more intentionality, more purpose, more passion, more alacrity. You fill in any way you want. That halachic way of living practically means every single part of our life, the earth realm, the manifest realm, where we bring something into existence, right? The final book of Chumash is Sefer Devarim, from the word davar, a thing. The final, like we've said, Sefer is corresponding to the realm of earth. Davar. It's now actualized, manifest, fully revealed. So when we've experienced that on the ground, the physical, mundane, practical parts of our lives are very concrete, are very experiential, and not mundane, because they're infused from the H with passion and meaning and purpose and intensity and the process of recreating oneself from good is good and better is better. And that drive makes us feel strongly alive. And that drive is the innermost passion to actualize our divine identity and live with it through the Torah and the mitzvahs and our avodah in a very straight way. But again, nothing is small, because to a great person, everything small is big. And to a small person, even the great things appear to be small. So as we're aspiring and striving people, we bring our higher upgraded wisdom, our hashkaf, and especially with the Chabur that we've had this year, wow, how to think of Shabbos not as a 1 day a week avodah, but a 7 day a week avodah. How not to just look at Shabbos and the malacha as refraining from the malacha, but actually using the malacha positively to create and refine and upgrade our divine identity. Wow. And how to go through each malacha individually and as a strand like pearls. All 39 malachas like 39 beautiful pearls that will eventually become one strand, one integrated process like the 39 weeks of pregnancy, the 39 malachas, a complete packaged way, how to create and refine ourselves spiritually in the greatest way, to make ourselves a mini mishkan, to reveal Hashem's presence within us, and if we're married, between our spouses and our children, and within our community, within Gansa Klalis from the world. What an unbelievable way of thinking and relating. And then the 9 conditions, 3 in mindset, 3 in action, and 3 in outcome, to actually practicalize what we do during the week, and to now look at our lives through the lens of creative activity, a malacha, and living Shabbos as a 7 day week avodah, and eventually transposing ourselves to such a level that we literally become godly beings, an actual makom in this world for Hashem to more fully reveal. How incredible is that? And then live that way. Live that way during the week. I'm not just here to do. I'm not even just here to grow and change. I'm here to transform myself to a level that I bring out the inner elokus in my actions, my capacity, my midot, and at the elemental level, reconstructing my own inner divine identity. And then realigning the inner elements with the inner divine image of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, Shem Havaya, and connecting myself to Him and Him back to me through this world, to fulfill His will, to bring His glory to and to infuse that in my daily life. I mean, every little thing, big thing has great meaning and purpose. It has great excitement. Our excitability level should be off the charts, because the more we live with the malachic framework, we see everything is Hashem Goizer Makayim. He decrees and He fulfills in the world, in our lives, through us, and we can be part of that ultimate divine plan. That's unbelievable. So that's another way we bring fire and earth together, when the hashkafa and the halacha merge, and we are committed and devoted to re-upgrading, redefining the higher levels of hashkafa, whether it's a tiny prat, a specific, or an upgrade in the framework itself, like we did in this Malachic Chabur, beautiful Chabura, very special. It's really a game changer that we're actually partnering with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creation to help HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring the world to its ultimate divine expression in our own truly unique and special way. Wow, that's unbelievable. And a willingness to trade up our hashkafa, and a willingness to upgrade our halachic way of living in a more precise way, a more exacting way, in a more truthful way, in a more honest way, in a more integrated way, each person in your own way, at your own level, as often as you want. So that's incredible. So now here, fire and earth are complementary and work together. And again, the more we see the two as being intimately bound together, we see for every point of hashkafa, there's an exact parallel in halacha, which means they're really essentially one thing. One's the pure potential in how we see, and one's the full expression in how we do. That's how they complete one another. They're really one and the same thing. And there again, fire and earth the first Yud and the final Hey are now completing and complementary and not contradictory. Why? Because we're going out of the elements of Teva, of the natural world, where they're misnaged, where they're opposing one another. And we're showing we, as human beings, shaped like a Vav, we're the connecting point of Shemayim into Aretz and Aretz l'Shemayim, heaven to earth and earth back to heaven. By us connecting ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and developing and growing spiritually and changing and even transforming ourselves, living transformatively on a regular basis, we are reworking the elements in ourselves to allow the reworking of the elements of fire in the world. And we see all the very misappropriated forms of fire, and of course, wind and water and earth too. And what we're doing is we're reconfiguring them in ourselves, bringing them back to the world and sowing on a Tevadik level. Yes, they're oppositional, but on a Ruchnistic level, he's kashrus, they actually connect together, and they can take the extremes of the world and they can counterbalance them, and they can bridge the gaps, and they could show the to see the inner divine unity where everything comes together and becomes one. We can actually see how they complete one another, and they all tie back to the integration of Shem Havaya in the world, Hashem signing his name into creation through the natural world, in ourselves, and in the world around us. And when we're made, we testify that we're bringing fire and earth together practically in our daily lives. And we come to see, unbelievable, this is really divine, elemental, transformative living. So these are two examples of many, of how the beginnings of the dyadic elements, in this case, earth and fire and earth, depending which would be dominant. You always, of course, lead with your dominant one and strengthen the more limited one, the weaker one, so they can have more of a shutfus and eventually join together in a fuller way. When we start to live elementally, we will naturally feel more balanced in ourselves. We will feel life is much more harmonious and peaceful, and we'll feel a deeper sense of wholeness, integration, tranquility, joy, and ultimate connection to Kadosh Baruch Hu. And he says, you discover me at that place, you'll see the place where the whole world is really mine in every way, shape, and form. So it's not so much the world is so small because everything is now connected, it's that Hashem is so big and that he's in everything, everywhere, all the time. May we be Zaycha to living with the Malachav Ma'amer and begin to apply the 9 conditions. In this case, pairing together fire and earth, whether it's Rosh Hashanah to Elul, whether it's how to integrate and connect together Harshkafa and Halacha, we come to see that the elemental interactions in ourselves and the world at large is very intimate, very intricate, and exquisitely beautiful. Thank you, Hashem, for opening our eyes to see. Okay, comments and questions, please.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Rabbi Labinsky.
My pleasure.
I have a question.
Please.
First of all, Shalom Aleichem, and to everyone on the call. And I did miss the first 15 minutes, so that's probably putting me at a disadvantage. But from what I gathered at the end here, as we're speaking, with the fire and the earth being hashkafa to halacha, I didn't catch which one was fire, Tishrei or Elul. I'm assuming Elul is fire and Tishrei is earth. No, the opposite. Yeah, right.
Hashkafa is fire, halacha is earth, because you walk on the ground. Tishrei is fire and earth is Elul, because it's the full actualization of something. The full actualization is right now, which is why you could just go, okay, we tend to look at it as, okay, summer's over, kids are back to school, time to send them off. I wouldn't say post-COVID, but post-home COVID. And now life goes on, but to actually go back to, oh my goodness, this is the final month. This is the harvesting month, going back to Rosh Hashanah. You got to get out of summer modality and through the seasons, and you got to get back to the Ruchnistic timeline of, you can't call it summer or pre-fall, sorry, but it's September tomorrow. You got to say, no, it's Elul. And this is the shlemus of Tishrei, and not upcoming Tishrei. No, you're not there yet.
Right.
not there yet. This is Tishrei of this year. And how to connect those together, they seem so far away. That's how far fire and earth feel.
Tishrei to this Elul. I see. Okay. So this is my question. I'm listening to you, and we're explaining the fire earth element. So I know on a personal level, I could tend to sometimes fall into the category of being fire, very little earth. I'm learning to work my earth elements into my fire, but more importantly, I really need my water. So for me, when I hear,
we're not.
I get you. I'm just saying I don't feel like this makes me feel complete. Is what I'm saying. When I hear this, I'm thinking, no, like, but I need my water in here. Like this won't balance me.
True. Okay, so again, you're correct. And if you heard the share last week, very important because we spoke it out conceptually. Well, so I'll read, but please go back to it. I'd appreciate it. You'll get a lot more of the answers from last week. But what we said is through the Malach of Ma'amer, there are many kinds of dyads. This is only one.
Right.
And so without getting pretty much all of them on a dyadic and triadic level, it's one of them, but any one will be necessary and for sure, as you're pointing out, insufficient. Okay. No dyad will give you everything. That's delusion. Mm-hmm. And I would never, ever try and represent it that way because that's highly misrepresentational. A dyad is one way to look at a relationship of gathering, how to look at a collective usable unit through interconnecting elements. That's what we spoke about last week, and please go back and listen to it. You'll more.
It was amazing. I took
but you need all of them, and to your point. So again, what I'm trying to do is to keep it only on one pair on any given week, because this is like very complex it's like neurosurgery, if you want to know the honest truth, not because I'm a neurosurgeon or claim to be, but has this level of utter complexity and detail, and it starts speaking on that level, it would sound so crazy, hyperbolic, complex, even practically, we'd be lost forever. So there's no point of doing that, but I think it would be a great injustice to not go to the next level of the elements through Ma'amer and just kind of brush over it. So as we said, this is going to probably be at least 6 to 8 weeks worth, where we're going to examine bits of, not fully, but bits of different kinds of interactions of different elements with different concrete examples and ways, just so you get a taste of what would the first and fourth one be, what would the inner two be, what would the first and third be. We explained it all last week, mystically and Hasidically, why there are many kinds of dyadic pairings, and they're all valid. And when we look at them on the parallel elementally and then practically, you're going to see you really need all of them. And that's what Ma'amer is being Machayavas, which again makes this, which is why, and again I'm saying very humbly, even practically and concretely, it's going to be hard because there isn't just one way to look at a collective unit. The normal way you'd say is just look at all four together, right? We called it Arma, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Afar. So that's one way, but you could also look at it backwards, and the Sfarim do talk about it. So it's not just top down, fire through earth, it's also bottom up, earth through fire, all four. So that's already two. And then each pairing you have, like the same thing here, we talked about fire and earth, but if we would go into another level, we'd say, well, which ordering? Fire, earth, or earth, fire? Well, that's going to depend. Is it Rosh Hashanah to Elul or Elul to Rosh Hashanah? Then you'll need to switch the order. And you can say, well, why would I need to switch it? Well, if you're looking at this Elul right now, you start off with earth, and then you work back to the preconception of that fire that started off here. Therefore, you must start earth to fire, not just fire to earth. So that already changes it. And then I'll throw in even a little more complex. How about this coming Tishrei? Well, what does it have to do with this year? And the answer is it has everything to do with this year, because the earth of this year is the beginning of fire for next year. So that means that the extent to which you can feel the shleimus of what the earthly acquisitions are this year, the full actualization of this year is, then you'll actually have a sense of what the new potential could be the upcoming year. It has to be a hemshech. a continuation, a natural progression of furthering your spiritual goals based on everything you became. You can't just pick something out of the blue and say, okay, this year you're gonna go, what's the context? Why'd you go there? And you could easily be doing a good thing that could be very, very not good with your life's direction because you never saw it in continuation of everything this year was, the last 5 years, 10 years, your whole life. Well, I just wanted to be spontaneous. Ruchni spontaneity, be very careful. The Yetzer Hara is at bay, trying to lead you astray. We don't want to do that. So therefore, the earth of this year will actually create the basis for the fire for Tishrei, the next month, in Tafshin Pei Aleph. So therefore, you see now that we stayed on fire and earth, but now as you start to flip them, which direction and how it gets a lot more, and that's just on those two. You start bringing the water element, whether it's water to earth or water to fire or the triadically, it just gets so much more complicated. And God willing, in time, I hope we'll give a little samplings. Once we've done probably 3 or 4 different kinds of dyadic relationships between the elements on the hiskashrus level, we'll start to do a little bit on the triadic level and how to talk about balancing and counterbalancing and creating more harmony, and maybe a tiny bit on the quadratic level. We'll do more of that in the next malacha. You see, really, practically, and again, we could sit and talk about this conceptually forever, but until you really get it practically, what would it look like? You don't really get the elements, because the malacha isn't just abstract, it's really lofty living on the ground, practical. So therefore, practically, I'm not asking you how was your summer. No offense, not so interested. But am I profoundly interested how your Elul is and how it's an extension of Rosh Hashanah? Thrilled, absolutely want to hear. So that's what we want to know. And then when I ask you, so what is your Rosh Hashanah going to be of this year? And don't just take a stab at it. Be systematic, be methodical, be straight and purposeful, and see the continuity. Then it's imperative you know what your whole year, Rosh Hashanah to Elul was, your fire to earth, all the way through, in order to find that new level of fire for the upcoming year in a much more deliberate, systematic, and purposeful way that's uniquely tailored to you on the ground, how your year actually was. You can't just pick any direction randomly and think it's going to work, because that's foolish. You're not really bringing Hashem in, and you're not saying, well, what was this whole year about? And based on everything Hashem gave you and guided you and directed you, that's where he wants you to go next. Right? Every mile builds on the previous mile of a trip and the further mile of where you're going in the place you're going to. You don't just say, I'm going to pull off the road now. Again, you can, of course, whether it's a bathroom break, a food break, or the like, or if you're traveling for a year, great. But if you're spontaneously doing that and you have a destination to go to, especially if it's your own wedding, may not be the best thing if it's going to make you late or a no-show. So when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, we can't say we're going to be late. You can't get there by Musaf. And you can't say no-show, oh, well, I was just so busy doing my cheshbon or exploring some other things that Hashem, I just didn't quite do it. You know, my mask wasn't just quite right, or it's not going to fly. When Hashem decrees the upcoming year and what's going to be, especially, imagine everything we as the world went through this year. Just think about that. Hold space for that, not just your own life on an earth level. And at a fire level and pure potential, that was Goizer at Rosh Hashanah last year for the Jewish people, the world, by Hoshana Rabbah. Everything about COVID, and we ain't done yet. Woo! And even if you had a great year personally, how do you reconcile that? I had a wonderful year myself, a person could say, but in terms of the totality of the world, how do I reconcile that on an individual versus a national versus a global level? So all of these things have to be factored in. All we're doing is looking at fire to earth, earth to fire, and then back to fire again. And yes, as Michaliba brought out, yes, when we start factoring in water into either one of those, which we'll do, and hopefully when we get to the triadic level, probably not going to be for like 3-4 weeks, then we'll understand just how complicated this is to do it right. To sit and speculate and all that, we don't want to be armchair psychologists here. We want to be spiritualists that really gets what's going on. We're going to feed it through different parts of the Torah and the mitzvahs and really understand precisely and exactingly how the Torah is machayiv. It obligates us to live spiritually. And if you strip it down to the elemental level, you'll see why it really is that way. That's what we're trying to do, how to grow through the malachas. But it's very important to hold space for which element you have, which are your composite elements, what are your tertiary, secondary, primary, and core elements. It will get much more complicated over time, but not just yourself. You have to see how to grow through the holidays. We just gave you a generic big picture. Obviously, we didn't talk about the middle of the year. We didn't talk about Cheshvan, Kislev, Tevis. We didn't get into any of that. Then we would apply the elements of wind, how to create movement the month after. That for sure is Mar Cheshvan. There's no question about it. Mar Cheshvan, you absolutely need to get your blower on and start creating some momentum. And then over the year, you have to learn how to vitalize your efforts. That's water. And eventually you come to earthify, as it were, in the latter part. So we're going to see clearly you need all four in a very big way. But when we're trying to hold space for all 12 months, that's the month of Elul. And Amir Tzashem, we're going to be speaking, I'm sure people may have seen the flyer, but we'll have to send something out that Rebbetzin Tabak from South Africa is doing this women's summit, beautiful summit for all this global women's learning, women rock. They're going to bring Geula, we know that. And in that schus, God willing, it'll create a tremendous hisorus. I had this special schus to be asked to speak, and I think it's going to be a week from this Tuesday at 2 o'clock. So I'm going to go into a lot more depth about the Avodah of Elul, how to connect it to Rosh Hashanah, and how to use the month to transition 2 years in a lot more depth practically, and then how to use that as a framework for your whole life. It's really quite spectacular. It's very practical, concrete, and just very spectacular at the same time. So if anyone wants to hear plug into that, we'll be sending that out, and the link will be posted live as well as to hear the recording after. But on this level, there's no question you need all four elements to master the holidays over the year. And believe it or not, every holiday is going to have all four elements, clearly. But if you're looking at the holiday, thank you very much, Rachel. She just sent it. riseintoyourcrown.com. So if you look at the holidays over a whole year, and you want to hold space for 12 months, which is not easy. If I say to you, I want you to give me a month-by-month accounting from Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh Tishrei, till the 11th of Elul today. Could you do it systematically? Not so easy. And I don't just mean the highlights. Could you start connecting things together and looking at it as an integrated developmental process and looking at the themes and how things evolve like a pregnancy, like a neonatologist would do for a newborn. Say, okay, every week, here's the fetal development. This is what's going to happen this week. This is what's going to happen first trimester, second and third. This is what Braxton Hicks, this is what 9th month all the way to labor and delivery and beyond. That's what a neonatologist is going to do. We as Yidden have to look at the Chagim that way, as a complete year of recreation, and then a willingness to break that down, recreate, restructure, and begin all over again. Begin again now, all over, mamish. That's fire to earth. Normally we don't think like that, because unless you're at the very beginning or at the very end, it's hard to hold space for the whole year that way. Plus, as the year is evolving, we're supposed to be in each month, each quarter, each week, each day, each hour, each moment, and enjoy and serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu, mamish b'simcha. But when you have the total perspective of a whole year, then we're also meant to look at that. That's what Ma'amar, the Malach of Ma'amar, is teaching you. How to see things as a collective unit, and then use it from all those individual parts. That's a unique koyach to have. Not just look at the individual pearls, to look at the whole necklace. Don't just look at those. If you think a florist, you go into a florist shop and say, yeah, I can do that too. My rabbi taught me about gathering. I'm good. No. A florist understands the koyach of gathering and knows how to put all the right flowers in the various colors and shapes and sizes and all the various little trimmings and coordinating it. It's a beautiful thing to see a bouquet come out just right through the eyes of a florist. We have to have that koyach too in our ruchnistic lives, and especially and including Elul right now. So I'm not trying to make it too big or trying to overwhelm you. I'm trying to say this is really the avoid of Elul, because it actually is, and again, this is what I'm going to talk about, Nirtza Hashem, much more practically, very relatable on the ground, but to tackle this big subject of Elul in terms of transitions, it's the totality from Eish to Afar. It spans 1 year and has the potential for the next year all at the same time, which means it's the only month of the year. It's a bold statement to say, but it's true. Elul is the only month of the year that spans 2 whole years. You can feel the depth of 2 years in 1 month, because it's the shlemus of 1 year and it's the pure potential of the seeds of the next year. That's how the Sfarim bring it down. That's why it's the 7 weeks of Nechama and the 3 weeks of the Parnusa, the 10 weeks starting from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz already is the beginning of the completion of 1 year and the sowing the seeds for the next. That means it spans 2 whole years. That's wild. That's why we feel crazy this time period, because I'm feeling disoriented. I don't know which up is back and back is forward and down is up, and I don't know which end is what. Great, you're right in Elul. You feel disoriented, Mazel Tov. Why? Because you're spanning 2 years. You're transitioning from one lower to reality to a new higher one. And if you don't have that orientation and you don't know how to understand transitioning properly, and you don't really hold space for 1 year and hold space for the potential of what the new year is going to be, and you don't start looking like that, you're going to feel so disoriented, you don't know what's going to fly. And then if you're going to get into seasonal affective disorders, oh, Rabbi, I'm getting bummed. Summer's over. The time's diminishing. Shabbos is getting smaller already. It's already starting to get darker. Don't say the word fall. Oh, don't even, I don't, what? But what are you getting bummed out for? Seasonal affective disorder, really, that's what, no. Sad backwards is das. We need to get to our higher das that says it's not about the seasons, it's growing through the elements, through time. And Hashem asks us and begs us, please, Neshamala, grow, change, develop, transform yourselves, bring out more elokus in yourself through your avodah in the year. And there's a kedusha to zman. There's a holiness to time, really. And there's a holiness to your time. And the fact you feel disoriented, great. You're plugging into Elul. You're spanning 2 years. Let's do it. Let's have the right orientation, do the right avodah. Then you can feel the depths of the earth from your fire, and then to recreate new fire from the full actualization of the earth. That is so liberating when you understand that. That's the dyadic process of Eish and Afar. That's what Ma'amer is bringing. And again, apply the 9 conditions. First, you got to be aware of it. You got to be aware of Zman and the Kedusha of Zman. You have to have the intentionality. This is my kavanah, what I'm trying to do. During Elul, it has to be with a purpose. You have to know this is your goal, your directive, right? Very clear, very, very clear. Then in action, it should be conventional. Don't just shoot by the off the cuff. Do things in a correct, meaningful way that Chazal guide us and be direct, be focused and on point in what you're doing in the month of Elul, and then be efficient. The month moves very quickly. We're already 1 week in. We're already in the 2nd week, and you blink and go, "Oh my goodness, it's Erev Rosh Hashanah." A whole year. Where is this year gone? Don't say that, please. At least not in front of me. Where is this year gone? 1 hour of 1 day of 1 week of 1 month at a time. The question is, where were you? Don't say, where is this time gone? Where were you? And if you weren't aware, intentional and purposeful, then, well, hello, time passed you by in this world and ultimately for the next year. We want to come with our time. We want to recreate our time to come with our days like the Avos did. So we want to be efficient. And then when it comes to the outcome, let's go back to it. We want to be constructive, not destructive. So what was constructed this year? To what extent did we really see tangibly, in a very tangible, concrete, and revealed way, what we begged for, pleaded, longed for, yearned for at Rosh Hashanah, and poured our heart out for? Remember, like a farmer, don't sow these great seeds and then walk away during harvest time. Right? Was it permanent? Right? The eighth condition. Did you create something, but it was very temporary, it was very fleeting, didn't have much momentum, it kind of came and went. I had a good run, but then I kind of fell out of it, or I just lost track, or I lost focus. And then was it substantial enough quantity, the last of the 9 conditions on the outcome level? Did what I achieved, was it constructive? Okay, great. Did it have some degree of permanence? Great. Was it substantial enough that I could put my finger on it and say, wow, this became a new, tangible, real part of my life. It's real and has mamashus. It has real substance in a way that I can build off of. But the outcome still reflects the action, and the action reflects the mindset. And now these 9 conditions become the qualitative basis in which how we use ma'amer with the element of fire and earth to have a very substantial full year, and then be so utterly thankful. Just walk around. Thank you, 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 Hashem, for this and this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, you couldn't say it fast enough. Of all the things that will have happened this year, and what was blessed, and if it was tied to your divine process, all the more so, and to be so besimcha with your avodah, and then have the boldness and the audacity and humility to give it all back to your tati and saying, as great as this is, it's still small compared to what I can be this next year. Please, Hashem, give me the strength to trade it up, to upgrade anew. And that's why we're blowing the shofar in the shul every day, and we're saying the David, Hashem, Oiri v'ishi. You're my light and my salvation, not just when things are troubling, but you're my light, you're my guiding light. You tells me what's right and wrong. You tell me what's truth and false. You're the one that gives me the right direction. And even upgrading my life. As great as it is, I don't want to be so satiated and saturated that I become complacent and comfortable and okay with good. Right? We're still in a COVID generation. We're still in a realm of Hester Panim, where we're masked. The Shekhinah is still in hiding. We're not connecting. We're still in a harchakos state. We're distancing at a level that Hashem says we're still not getting it right at the level we need to. Be bold enough to trade it up. And then the earth goes to the next level of fire. And not out of just sheer desperation. Really be so thankful, immensely thankful for every form of bracha Hashem has given us. Use it to be so besimcha, to be a yid, to have the Torah in the mitzvahs, to serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu with an unbelievable geschmack avoida, and then the audacity and boldness to say, I want an upgrade. And I want to mamlich, not mamlich you. I want to mamlich you anew, as a new kind of Oved Hashem. I've never seen myself as an Oved Hashem because I've never seen you as a king this way before. I want to have a higher hashkafa of seeing you in the world like never before. And then eventually I want to practicalize it and make it tangible all the way to the next level. I want to keep creating and recreating myself anew, because you, Tati, are everything. You can do everything. And it's not just because I want a good life. I want to be marbek kavod shamayim in this world. This is elemental living. This is living with the koich of malacha and a willingness to live dynamically. Sure, is it a lot more effort? Of course. If you want bigger things, you got to pay a bigger price, but you got to do it b'simcha, willfully. And you want to strive in higher ways, you got to be willing to trade up. And you can only trade up what you actually have. You got to acquire it fully. Make sure it's well in your hands. And then come Rosh Hashanah time, give it back to your Tati and say, Tati, thank you for everything, but I am nothing, I have nothing, and there is nothing but you. I give it back to you willfully and ask humbly to be mamlich you again in a whole new way so I can serve you in a much greater way. Okay, this is what we're aspiring toward. This is the depth of Elul. Okay, other comments or questions, please? Thank you. Makes sense, not make sense? Can you think of other applications, how you bring it into your life? Okay, love to hear from whoever else is here, please. And if not, that's okay too. I could share more examples on how to do it. There's no shortage by any means. Living elementally, absolutely exquisite, up there and on the ground.
I would love for you to share another example. That would be great if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, shalom. Okay, thank you. I am fine. If you're willing
I
to
mean,
hear
I
me
just
more.
think really, really tactless, because I think as much as, I don't know about anybody else, but I think as much as I strive, I think that I need really nitty gritty tools. Like I'm just now really starting to like go through, I was reading Reb Berkowitz's book, you know, A New Approach to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on his shiurim. And I was like, really, I don't think I've done properly, like writing down what's my strengths, like really cheshboning it out and making it very, very, very tachless. Like I have a lot of projects I'm doing all the time. This and I like, where are my nemesis and what's going, you know? And I just like, whatever tools you have, I'm grateful also, because I feel like.
Yeah, well, I think during this year, we spoke through a lot of tools about how to apply it to, how to relate to your hashkafa and halacha on a daily basis. Very important. It's very important to know what your hashkafa and halacha is and how to learn it daily. We certainly talked about it in the Chagim sense. Another way is, we've talked about this in the early parts of the year, but this is really more in depth what it comes from. When we do anything, practically, it will have three basic stages, like an essay. You have a beginning, a middle, and an end. The beginning is the introduction, the middle is the body, and the conclusion is the final part of an essay, paragraph, thesis, what have you. Everything works that way, with a rosh, taich, and saif, a beginning, a middle, and end. But the question is why, and how do we practicalize it here? So if you just even think about how you are, we can talk about people who are starters, we can talk about people who are good continuers, and we can talk about people who are finishers, who can close things. So that very process itself is really a process of fire to earth. So you could say, well, I may be a little bit of one, not much of the other, and for sure, I wouldn't even have a clue how to orient to the third one, whatever that is. So we have to really work on, if everything in this world is mikayach el hapoel, from potential to actual, we really have to develop ourselves to be all three in the best way that we can. We may not be great at it, terrific, amazing, supreme, awesome, but we have to learn how to be starters. We have to learn how to be continuers, to move things through. And we also have to learn how to finish things, to complete things, to wrap them up. So you could pick any activity you want and start to think that way. Do I have a hard time in this one? In one area, you may have a hard time starting, another area following through, another area closing. So learn from that, learn about yourself, and also learn how to practically get those tools. And again, these are tremendous subjects. Why have a hard time starting? So for some people, it's an issue of motivation. I'm just not motivated. I don't know what my passions are. I don't know what my inner drives are. For other people, it's laziness. Others, complacency. Others, I don't really have a direction. So start where? Imagine going into a car, hitting the GPS, and you want to just start driving and it says, excuse me, sir, I need to know your point of destination, where you are, and then we'll work on the route. And you go, no, I don't need to give you that. Just start, will you? And you keep pressing and banging the machine that goes, the machine says, sir, you really have some directional life challenges here. I've been pre-programmed to have a point of a destination with a point of arrival and point of departure, and then I'll calculate and give you everything. That's how life works. So if I don't have a direction in the morning, I don't have the passion and motivation. I'm not going to overcome my laziness. I'm not going to be able to break through my complacency. And then I have to look at my resistances. What are my resistances? If it's in the wintertime, I'm making something up. How many times do you hear, oh, it's so cold outside and it's so warm inside, and the sheets and the covers, and or I don't really get up until I hear 8 or 10 snoozes. I'm only on number 3. I got at least 5 to go, as if that clock radio is determining your life. Or no one else is really around, so Rick, who do I need to live for? So whatever your challenge, I've just given you a bunch, you gotta start leaning into them and challenging them and reworking them so that you can have the motivation, etc., and all the various things that we said. That's on the starting level. On the continuing follow-up level, maybe I'm a great starter because I'm passionate about things, but I don't have a methodology. I don't have an actual approach with tools how to further that cause. What are the next several steps to move forward? Or I have them, but I don't know how to use them, or I tried using them, but they're not working. And I don't have a mentor and a guide and someone to help me or walk me through, or a partner to team up with, or to hold me accountable to. I need accountability. I'm not good on my own, but if I know I have to call it in daily and speak it out with someone, whatever it is, as follow-up, furtherance, or maybe I do, but I don't really think about measuring what I'm doing. And am I really achieving what I am doing? And maybe that creates the passion to keep moving forward many different ways on the following through, the furthering of the process. And then finally, the closing. That's for sure the earth realm. You know what? I'm already my head's already in the next project. But you know, there's a lot of loose ends. And like we're going to see the 38th Malacha, Maka B'Patesh, the final hammer blow, is learning how to put full closure on an experience before you change location and redefine the whole thing. Once we get there, we're only on 4, so please be patient with me. However, a little taste means you have to learn the Koyach of Maka B'Patesh, how to close things up, how to fully wrap things up in a way they're packaged, full, closed, complete, and then use the koyach to move forward. That's what a siyum is all about, whether it's on a tractate, whether it's a stage of schooling, a stage of life, career, stage of anything, is learn how to be Messiah, how to have a siyum to complete something, and then set new motivation, new intentionality, and new, including Elul. The 29th of Elul is going to come, and when that day finally closes, imagine like I'm in 1 year, one whole reality, and then a few hours later, right, you start and hear the word Hamelech, and you daven Mariv, and you come going, I just can't believe it. And you go, what's that? I'm in a whole new year? Like, how is that possible? 1 hour before, I'm here in this year, and I'm in that year. And you're going, how is that possible? So if you didn't close up and complete and fully consolidate 1 year, it's still left hanging, dangling, and straggling. And then you're going, oh my goodness, Taka, that's my life. I'm a hanger and a dangler and a strangler. I have a bunch of loose ends just dangling all over the place. Well, just like shoelaces, you gotta tie them up into a nice bow, make it good, and move on. Same thing in life. You have to learn how to close things up, and you have to see why. Part of it could be, I'm afraid to succeed, because maybe I'll really make it, and it'll show that I'm something, and I don't want to be a something. Part of it is fear of failure. See, I can't do anything right, so what's the point? Part of it could be my own self-defeatism or my own shame tied to, well, I'm not such a good person. Who am I to do such a thing? Part of me may be direction. Well, if I finish this, what's next? If I retire, what am I going to do after? If I'm going to finish this year, where am I going to go next? And maybe a directional issue, which again is a wind quality, right? Maybe the passion level, that's the fire quality. So you're going, why is it? Part of it may just be, I'm distracted. So I just naturally get caught up in other things, and I can't put the right compartmentalization. Part of it may be I have a fear of letting go of things. I get emotionally attached very intensely, or the opposite. I'm so emotionally detached. Who cares? I finished this, I finished that. What's the big deal? Who cares about anything really? Just on to the next. So whatever your issue is in closing, and it could be any combination, you have to really look into yourself and also on an earth in a practical way. Why is it that I have a hard time closing fully, and then moving forward? So there's another practical example with lots of tools we just spoke out. And that can be applied to any and all areas of your life. How am I a starter? How am I a continuer? And how am I a closer? And even though one may be dominant, one may be moderate, one may be weak, you have to keep working at all three and keep growing in all three. And of course, the areas of the greatest limitations and weaknesses ultimately is where our biggest tikkunim are to be made, and potentially where our greatest strengths and merit will be. So therefore, Hashem makes no mistakes, and we're perfectly imperfect in how we work things. So you can't just simply say, well, I'm a good starter, I'll just pass it on to someone else. In a business sense, you can. In a marriage, if you have a codependent relationship where you're split off from some things and let your spouse carry it, okay, potentially. But if you want to work on being a more whole person, a more complete person, a more fulfilled person, you have to learn on a micro and macro level to develop those things all within yourself at your own level. Now, in a relationship, you can certainly get a lot more marital acquisitions on a quality level. In a business, you'll have the same thing. You can't be great at everything. If you're excellent at starting and solid at one and mediocre at the other, great. You should thrive in being excellent at what you do and find other people who are excellent at those others and create a great business or a partnership. You don't have to be everything to everybody all the time. But at some level, you have to learn how to do each one fine. Why? Because you have to learn how to create these dyads and triads and quads. Because that's what it means to have elemental interconnectedness, elemental development, elemental shlemus. On much higher levels, that's shlemus. But if you can't at least engage yourself in some of these various, and to say, well, don't blame me, Rabbi, Hashem didn't give it to me. He didn't give you what? Excellence? Awesomeness at something? Okay. He didn't give it to you at all? Impossible. Every single body is a microcosm of all of creation, of Shem Havaya, which is Arma, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Alfar. In your own proportions, your own degrees, yes. If you're cross-comparing, well, why am I not like this person? Why don't I have this? And if I only had, okay, I understand that. But it's time to take off those blinders, not just your mask, but the blinders over your eyes, and ask yourself, what are the proportions of my own elements? What are my strengths in each of the fire, wind, water, and earth? And how do I begin to start looking at how to develop those in the better, best way I can according to my capacity at my level? And don't ever cross-compare. Because it's apples and giraffes. Hashem will simply ask you intra-comparatively, within oneself, what was your capacity? How much did you take careful inventory? And did you develop it and use it in the best, fullest way based on what I gave you? And you weren't expected, Neshamala, to do any more, but none less. And I want you to make the most out of it. So that's how you would begin to do that. Is that another good practical example?
Yes, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and this could just keep going and going and going. Literally, literally, and literally. And you're going, wow, there's so many ways that we could dyadically pair up the elements. Why? And the answer is just very simple. And we said this before, but we're going to say it again. In a world of separateness, of pirud, of Hester Panim, concealment of the divine, everything's going to look extreme. Our job is to break out of the extreme, break out of the imbalance, to find the gaps, the middle grounds, where to work on bridging them, connecting the opposites together, and eventually bringing them together in a more wholesome way, a more interconnected way, and a more complete way. That's how we reveal Yichud Hashem, Hashem's divine unity through his duality of this world. When we reconcile that elementally, we're reconciling Hashem's separateness in this world, which is called brokenness, repairing it, and unifying his world by unifying the elements in ourselves, becoming more whole and integrated in our divine identity, and more committed, devoted servants. That's why we're doing this. Of course it's hard. If you tell me any of this is easy, I just don't know what planet you're on or what you're ingesting, and we'll leave it at that. This is hard work, but it's a labor of love. Loving yourself to be the best you're meant to be, loving others to bring that out in them and connect with them in a God way, and loving a Kadosh Baruch Hu, his world, our divine service, and the tremendous chus and opportunity to live like a yid and to mekadosh Shem Shemayim in this world. We should be zeicha to keep living with the elements, and specifically today the koyach of ma'amer, and how to create collective units of dyads, and we'll continue Mirz Hashem next week, and how to slowly start living our lives in divinely oriented ways. And remember, we just have to do our part. It's so small. As big as this feels, we do the small part, and our Tati is carrying us every step of the way. Okay? We should be zoichet to living this way. We're going to more practical examples, Mirz Hashem, next week. And we'll probably be doing this again, going into the 10 days of Tshuva, and probably even into a little bit of Mar Cheshvan, because there's lots of areas to grow spiritually, but when you start looking at it through the lens of Ma'amer, the 9 conditions and the various dyads and triads, you'll see so much more dynamism in the elements. And then once we get enough of that, we'll take it to a new level in Dosh, which is also it's much more micro detailed there, way more, like in just very tiny details. So it'll feel much smaller and even more tangible. So it's going to evolve as we grow through the Melachos. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
I'm here today. I really appreciate your time, and it should be a continued schus for Klal Yisrael,